Welcome to the Finjan Show. Thanks for being with us today. I'm your host, Faris Alami, and this episode is brought to you by Connecting Dots Globally, a nonprofit focused on youth entrepreneurship development in a global trade settings. Marc, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Faris. It's great to be here.
Thanks for being with us. This is awesome because I get to talk to you twice. So I'm excited about that, actually. So maybe, Marc, you could tell just our audience is who's Marc and what do you do?
Sure. So I'm Marc Manashil, and I'm adjunct assistant professor at NYU at the Silver School of Social Work. I'm also the co-founder of the Adaptive Leadership and Human Services Institute at NYU Silver. I also lecture at UC Davis, and I'm the principal and co-founder of Co-Innovate Consulting. So I have my hands on a lot of different activities.
You're not busy at all. Sounds like the minute you have a minute, you're creating something new. That's what it sounds like. That's awesome. So maybe you could take us either in the adaptive leadership or your newest venture, whatever you want to take us to. I'm okay with it. Obviously, being a professor has its own work. I want to focus today our conversation, if possible, on just your entrepreneurship journey and how you've done that.
Yeah.
So why did you start, any of these startups, and how long have you been doing them for?
So we started Co-Innovate Consulting in 2013. And what we're trying to do with Co-Innovate is we're really trying to help organizations and teams and groups, communities address what we call difficult adaptive challenges. And adaptive challenges are those kind of challenges where you can't throw a technical solution at it and try to solve it. And when you try to do that, it usually fails. The solution, or even progress, if you will, is more about changing attitudes, behaviors, culture, and helping people to adapt to the rapidly changing circumstances that we find ourselves in, especially today. So it's really helping people figure out, well, what is it we need to preserve and what's working well, but also what are those things that we need to let go of, what we need to discard that aren't serving our organization or our team's purposes. And what are the new things that we need to learn? What are the new innovations that we need to incorporate to then kind of replace what's been discarded? And kind of accompanying people along that journey, if you will, of trying to adapt and I think especially like the losses that come with when you do something day in and day out every day, and then you have to let go of that, and then to add insult to injury, you have to learn something completely new, which can upset your own sense of competence. So I think what we're trying to do is to really accompany people along that path of kind of adaptation, and so they can make greater progress and have greater impact.
That's really interesting. And, maybe one other time we'll side talk about our Resilient Entrepreneur Program, because one of the things I've learned throughout my journey talking to entrepreneurs is really the mindset is really what usually gets things moving in the directions or not. So what is the mindset behind it? How do you react to what's happening versus what you really do? And what you think about it. I tell people it's the stories that you tell yourself is what makes or breaks the business or the things that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So I'd love to dig deep with you and learn more from your perspective, how that works or not.
Absolutely.
Since it sounds like this is your field. So
I think,
go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that I think that kind of points to the purpose of what we're trying to do, which is kind of leadership is kind of the missing piece of what we see in organizations. Like in my experience, like I've been a part of different kinds of organizations. I started as a social worker. I worked in a variety of different nonprofit organizations, human services, and then went into international development and philanthropy. And a lot of good organizations that are out there doing good stuff. And I felt like really proud to be part of those different kinds of groups, right? Some did really great stuff. Some did not so great stuff. Yeah. Cool. But I think it was sort of like the missing piece was sort of the leadership piece, right? Because I feel like what I often saw in organizations was conflict. Sometimes I'd see conflict happening, or I'd see people who are operating in certain silos and not talking to one another.
Marc, I want to take you. That's actually a good point. I want to take you back just for 1 second for something,
Sure, sure.
which is I appreciate you telling me why you did it for what you
Yeah,
saw in the market. But my
yeah,
experience work with entrepreneurs like you is a lot of times it's something that you personally have been affected by or
yeah.
been touched by. So I would love to maybe shed a light on that. If it's something that you personally, saw or, or experienced and what it meant to you. So kind of like the why you did it beyond the market itself. So you saw an opportunity in the market that there's a need for this, you went after it,
Yeah.
but what was behind it from your motivation to do it?
Yeah, I think it was that personal experience of being in those situations and seeing those same arguments happen over and over again. Because sometimes, have you been in those situations where, people are having a conversation and then it turns into an argument and then they have that same argument a week later or a week after that. And then you begin to realize it may be about different subjects. It may be about different topics, but it's the same argument, right? And I think that I just found myself in those kinds of situations where I saw that happening. I thought there's something at the root here that we're not getting at. There's something happening in the organization. People are not working well together. And I think I just had too many of those experiences personally working in the field. Like I was saying, I was a part of those organizations and the work was good. Like from a technical point of view, the organization is doing amazing stuff, but they were kind of limiting themselves. And so I think that's why I was saying that leadership being the missing piece of it. How do we actually bring up uncomfortable subjects? How do we bring up things what's the elephant in the room that we're not dealing with? And if we could get at that kind of stuff, then maybe we can actually be a lot more effective. And I think that's fundamentally the why for me, is to be able to help people do that. Because I think oftentimes people lean into their expertise, the technical side of the work, right? Well, I'm really good at this, right? But then they get very entrenched in their own view that they're good at it. And they're not willing to admit that the work happens because we bring people together and it's the bringing out the best of everyone that leads us to make progress. And so that was the big aha for me.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing that. I appreciate that. So, let's take a break. Clearly, we can keep you here for all day, but we need to take a quick break and then come back and ask you a few more questions. Thanks for being with us.
Thank
We'll
you.
be right back. Welcome back. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
So, being in business since 2000, you said 3 roughly, right? So, or 13, 2013.
2013
Yeah.
for Co-Innovate.
So you'll be almost 10 years next year, or you'll be 10 years actually next year. You're 9 years old now, this organization that you started. You've, I'm sure, had all kinds of ups and all kinds of downs, moments where you felt you got it and where you felt you lost it. And I know those things could come the same moments. I'm curious to hear from your thoughts. Maybe you could share with us one of the down moments where you felt, I'm not sure if I could do this or not, or the business is not doing well, or whatever moment you want to pick with us. Please feel free to share one, just one.
Yeah, well, the moment that really comes to mind is actually from another organization that I started called the Clarence Foundation. But it bears a lot of similarities to, I think, the challenges that I face in Co-Innovate and a lot of people face in organizations. So when I started it was a publicly supported foundation that tried to link grassroots NGOs all over the world with donors in the US. And so we try to make those connections and really look at organizations that in particular were just kind of neglected or overseen by the larger NGOs and foundations, and to try to get capital to them. And it was very powerful. We organized these giving circles where donors would come together, pool their money, and then figure out, well, what do we want to do with it? And then they would kind of engage in this joint exercise of giving their money away together as a group. So it was very powerful. But one of the things about philanthropy is that people, and this makes total sense, people want to support projects on the ground. They want to support the kids, they want to support the families. They don't necessarily want their money to go to operations and, administration and things like that,
sure.
right? And it was really hard, right? So I had a lot of trouble raising money for that, just the operational part of what it was that we were trying to do. And there were times where I thought, we're not going to be able to make it. Lots of late nights, not getting much of a salary at all. My wife being incredibly patient, I like credit her so much for supporting me, through that whole period. But there were times where I just like, we have no money in the bank, we can't continue, and am I going to be able to do this? And there was a donor who I met with. His name was Herb West, and I met him at a conference a little bit before, and he took me out to lunch. And I just remember this distinctly. And one of the principles of fundraising is you never want to tell your donor, well, we're just about to fall apart. We don't have any money left. Can you please help us? It feels like it's just not a good idea, right? But I don't know, there was something about like I was in that situation. I just decided to be open and just kind of
Be
I don't know,
vulnerable.
it was just like
Yeah.
it touched I don't know, there's something about him that touched me. And I just decided to open up and say, this is the challenge that we're facing. And he said to me, Mark, I wanna support you. I believe in you. And he took out his checkbook and he wrote me a check for $10,000.
Mm.
And so it's like, it's those moments, just when you think that it's all over. And I imagine a lot of entrepreneurs in a lot of different, and in Co-Innovate, there have been those moments where, oh, I don't think I can continue. Then something happens, right? Something shows up and it enables you to live another day. And so,
Wow,
thanks to
thank you
Herb.
so much for sharing that. I mean, I so appreciate it because I know when people share pain, it brings up wounds that maybe never healed, or you just put a band-aid on it and you keep moving forward. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, Mark. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Wow. All right. So, you took us on that path. So take us on the upwards where you felt like you got
Sure.
the world under control. You're
Yeah.
ready to conquer whatever you're feeling really, amazing about it.
Yeah. And one other thing I want to mention about Herb is that once he passed away, I found out from his daughter that he did this for all kinds of people. He was like, yeah. So they found all these checks that he had written, right? So, just a beautiful guy. But anyway,
That's amazing.
I know. Yeah, he was a really important
So
person
your
in my
guts
life.
was
So
very good, obviously. So you should use your guts more often, Mark. That's what it sounds like.
thanks so much. Um, so in terms of I think the up thing was, so I was telling you about that foundation I was a part of. So I did that for 10 years. And then there was a point at which, I was needing a change. And I wasn't sure what that was going to be. The foundation's work continued, but I needed a break personally. And I decided to apply to the Harvard Kennedy School, and was accepted and had the privilege to go there and learn adaptive leadership. And I think that was like a big up moment for me. And it was another, I remember this too. It's funny how these people, they kind of come into your life at strategic points, and there was this class, it was adaptive leadership taught by Ron Heifetz. And that's kind of the foundation of what I was talking about earlier in terms of the work that we do. And I remember my friend said to me, Mark, you got to take this class. And I said, I don't know. I'm a social worker. I have done that psychological stuff. I don't know if I need it. And he goes, no, Mark, you really need to take this class. And I remember sitting there, and there was a sort of deadline where you had to register. And this was a class that was very popular. So at the Kennedy School, you had to bid points on the ones that, were really influential. So, and I just thought for a minute, I was just like, okay. And the clock was ticking, right? I had to make a decision. I just said, okay, what the hell? I'm just going to do it. And I just pressed the button, right? And I just did it. And that decision wound up really impacting the trajectory of my life and my work. And learning the adaptive leadership framework for me just taught me so much about, my own failures. And I think when we talked before, I told you that this was something that I wish that I had learned 20 years earlier, if only I had known what a difference it would have made. But I also remember you telling me that, maybe I wasn't ready to receive it yet, right? And so, it came at the right time. But for me, I just it's really important to bring this work out into the world so that more people can have access to these kinds of ideas. So that's the high point, is learning about that and recognizing that other people could benefit and being able to help.
Well, Mark, you gave me lots of goosebumps, and clearly we could keep you here for a couple more days, not just one or two, right? Um, and I appreciate you remembering our conversation. Thank you very much for that. So, yeah, I always believe that things happen for good reasons, and sometimes you, looking back, you might think, "I wish I would have done this." I always use that line that you might have not been ready. The information might have not meant much to you. Kind of like seeding. You just got to keep going. My last question, just so we can, close it for the day at least, and maybe we could have you back for a deeper conversation. Uh,
Yeah.
I do occasionally some of those. So the last question, looking back to your point, and now that you know what you know, if someone getting started or just looking to start a business, what would you tell them? What would you say something to them today that you wish you would have heard it, even though you acknowledge that we might have not meant anything, but what would you say?
So I would coin a phrase that my dear friend and colleague at Co-Innovate taught me. His name is Jamie Purdon. And he said, try to act out of awareness rather than conditioning. And to me, what that means is that we have these kind of default behaviors that are kind of hardwired within us, ways in which we react to situations. So if there's a trigger, right, there's a response because we've learned to do that. It's been conditioned within us over time to just kind of respond a certain way. And I think that one of the things I've learned from doing adaptive leadership work is the importance of just kind of taking a moment and kind of taking stock of what's actually happening, right? And to try to understand the system or try to understand what's happening around you before you jump into action. So there's something about that. It's like that pause, right? Is trying to insert that pause between stimulus and response, which is like really hard. Like it's easy to talk about, but I think really hard to practice. But I think there's something about, and I think it's akin to mindfulness. It's just kind of just not just falling back on your defaults in the way that you've always done things, but to just step back and think first and to understand first and then act. And it's developing that practice and failing along the way so many times. But I feel like that awareness in what we do is so pivotal.
I love that. I didn't capture it all, but I think what you said is being aware of your reaction, approaching it with an awareness mindset versus approaching it from the reaction that your body or mind might have told you to react based on previous experiences.
Yeah, the role
Powerful,
that you
Mark.
tend to play.
Very
Yeah.
powerful. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing such insights with us. Thank you so much for making time, and thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks for being with us, Mark.
Thanks so much, Faris. It was fun.
For our listeners, thank you for joining us today at the Finjan Show. Till the next show, have a good day.